I was gonna do a joke about me not being, belonging here because I'm a developer. Now I actually feel like I do belong because I'm documentarian. Yay! That's awesome. I feel like I belong. I'm a developer who loves documentation. I've been a developer for a long time. I recently, though, started at Grafana as a developer advocate. And that basically means that I'm a developer that helps and educates other developers and makes sure that they're productive and successful. And that means internally, but most importantly, externally, since we're an open source company, or we develop an open source product. So developers using our product, them being happy and productive is kind of, well, I mean, that's crucial for us. So I was going to talk about how we do docs as code for Grafana. And I mean, I have some slides, but I would much rather prefer if you stop me and ask along the way. How many here knows about Grafana? There's a few of you. Yeah, awesome. Another question: who in here feels like they know what docs as code is? Okay. Markdown? Okay, awesome. So Grafana is an open source platform for data visualization. And what do I mean by that? Well, we do have a playground. You can visit play.grafana.org, and it looks something like this. So we're a visualization tool that jacks into different data sources, databases, and so on. And then we visualize time series, which is like basically a time and a value. As long as it's that like time and a value and a lot of them, we can visualize it, basically. So that's what we do. And we're open source, which means that anyone can look at the source code, they can contribute. That goes for documentation as well. It's kind of like a happy story because it was written by a guy in Stockholm, and it kind of grew, and it filled like a space that there was no one in that space, so it grew uncontrollably and has been hugely popular. But at that point, it was no company involved, right? It was just this open source tool that everyone wanted to use, basically. So recently, we started building a company around it. And at this point, we have more than 400,000 users all over the world. But more importantly, for this meetup, we have more than 900 individual contributors all over throughout the years. So that means that 900 potential people that have contributed documentation. This is a challenge. So all our content or all our documentation is written in Markdown, and I'll show you in a bit how that looks. So this Markdown is then generated into HTML for our documentation site, and we're using Hugo. You mentioned MK Docs, sort of similar tool. But we've felt like we've run into two challenges. The first one is like, how do we make it worthwhile to make even smaller contributions? Because oftentimes when you think about contributing to open source, you think like, well, I need to know a lot. I need to be an expert in my field, and I need to be like know all this stuff before I get started. Whereas we want you to contribute even if you find a missing comma. And how can we lower the bar enough so that you're likely to do that? If you see that missing comma, how can we make it so easy that you'll fix it either way, even though it's such a small thing? And how do you keep something consistent when you have 900 people all over the world, many of whom doesn't speak English as their first language? So how do we make sure that everything is consistent? Another thing is that all the documentation has, like throughout the years, has been built by developers. So it's built, developers building on Grafana feel like, we need to start writing documentation if people are going to understand what we're building, right? So that's why the documentation got built, and that's probably why we started with docs as code right away. As a developer, I can definitely agree on we don't like Confluence. It's too far from what I'm doing. It's like way over there, and just keeping the documentations in the same editor, just right where I am. It's so much more valuable to me. So to tackle the first challenge, why it works for us is that Markdown is just text, right? There's nothing else. We don't need a CMS. And I like to your point about GitHub being a CMS, I can totally see that. So, but I didn't have time to change the slide. But the point I'm trying to make here is that you don't have to make an account at Confluence to make a contribution. If you have a GitHub account, I mean, if that could be considered a CMS, that's all you need, right? You don't have to have a Confluence, you don't have to have a specific Google account and all that. You can just write text and submit it to GitHub, and that's all you need. But yeah, sure.
The documentation that you write, is that only for documentation for the developers, or do you write for other kind of documentation stuff?
So there's part of the documentation is for people who actually develop Grafana and contribute and actually write code for Grafana. There's also documentation for people using the visualization. So how do I add a new visualization? How do I add a new database in the UI? We have a lot of outdated images.
We all do.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When are you actually writing this documentation? Is it at the same time simultaneously when you write the code, or after you write the code?
Yes. So when a developer writes a new feature or make a change, they submit a pull request. And if this is a change that affects documentation, then it's going to be a comment in there that you need to update the documentation for this, so that everything related to this change, including documentation, is in there. Otherwise, it's going to be outdated. That being said, we're only human, so some of the times we miss stuff, so there might be outdated stuff in there.
Then you get a documentation to add.
Yeah, exactly.
One more question.
Yeah.
You just mentioned that just text. I was thinking like this. If there is a sequence diagram or there is a state diagram which we need to place in, just to chip it in the documentation, how do we do with the current format?
So your question is, how do we turn this text into documentation by DocSide?
If it is just the text with Markdown, I'm completely fine.
Yeah.
But if it is a picture which I need to insert,
yeah,
it is not the text, right?
No, it's not. But Markdown does have support for images. You can write like the text like when you hover, and you can provide a path to where the image is. But no, you can't place it wherever you want, if that's what you mean.
Yes.
Yeah. So you're kind of limited, and that's what, like, you can't place it wherever you want, and that's a limitation in DocSide's code. I don't know if restructured text or ASCII doc, if you have more justified images or stuff like that.
Some, but I don't use it.
Some, okay, yeah. So yes, there's some lack there. Yeah. But like I said, we can do even more. We can lower the bar even more, and by providing documentation for how to contribute documentation, right? So that's something that we've been doing. This is the documentation site, for example. So you can go to grafana.com/docs. You can find our documentation there. And so everything here is generated from Markdown using Hugo. So if you go down here, for example, under contribute, there's a site on how to get started contributing documentation, for example. So my vision is that if you don't know nothing, you should be able to read this and directly know how to make a change. And another thing that I've understood during the last months that I've been at Grafana is that if you're new to Grafana, there's a lot of stuff that you don't know about. And if you're a first-time contributor, let's say that you're a tech writer who wants to contribute, but there's all these words. Like, what do they mean? How can I edit something if I don't know what this is? So we started implementing a glossary, for example, to make sure that everyone can get started at least with the basic stuff, basically. So that's about lowering the bar to get started. But in terms of the other challenge that we had, right? We had the second challenge is how do we keep docs consistent when we have so many individual contributors? And a lot of them only contribute once. They don't do anything else, they just do this one comma, right? How can we make sure that everything is consistent? And that's why we started developing a style guide. And this is something like, if you ask developers, what's a style guide for documentation? They were like, what is that? But as an engineer, I feel like this is a linter for documentation. A style guide is my linter. I can go to documentation and say, this is why this is wrong. And this is why it's right. This is why this is beautiful. So that makes it very helpful when you're submitting a pull request, because you can provide a review. You can review this documentation and you can point to a style guide and say, this is why we need to change this, instead of having fruitless discussions on, no, I think this looks better.
Right.
You probably all know this. Developers, not so much. So that's kind of an overview. I was hoping to show a bit of what I mean by all this.
Mm-hmm.
So I was gonna walk through these three different ways of contributing to an open source project. And first off, we have proposing changes, right? A lot of people think that contributing to open source is about writing code or writing stuff and then getting it into the actual repository. But contributing can be just proposing a change, right? I see this as a problem. Can we please change it? So in this case, if we go to this page, we see that since we started having a style guide that tells us that all headings should be sentence case. So this is a problem right now, and something that we haven't fixed yet. So how do we go about changing this? Well, first of all, I want to let people know that this is an issue. So up here, we have this link that says request doc changes. So I'm gonna just copy this. Hang on, stay with me. This is trickier than it looks. There we go. So I click request doc. It's kind of small, but trust me, it's there. If I click that link, I'm getting sent to GitHub. So I need to have a GitHub account to do this. But I could go like, and then it automatically fills in which page in the documentation I'm in. So then I can leave a comment here. This should be sentence case. Of course, I could link to the actual section in the style guide if I wanted to, but for the sake of brevity, right now I won't. Should be sentence case, and what I'm doing here, I submit the new issue, and there it is. I've contributed to an open source project simply by saying that this needs to be changed. And what happens then is someone that is a maintainer, someone that has commit rights to this repository, will go in and mark this. I can actually do this where I can say that this is docs. So it's a label that I can mark this issue as being related to documentation. This means that I can go to the section on issues, and I can check here under labels. If I want to find things that is related to documentation, I can find all these things that needs to be done in the documentation, right? So that means that if I want to, I can find something that I feel like, oh, I can do this. And then I decide that, okay, I actually do want to make a change here. So if we go back to this page here, I feel like, actually, you know what? I want to make this change. I just reported it, but I want to fix this. So what I do then is that I go to the same page up here, edit this page, right? There's a button there. I get sent to the actual Markdown file in GitHub. So this is, for those of you who haven't seen Markdown, it's kind of small right now. Can everyone see? So in Markdown, a hashtag is a heading, and 2 hashtags is a subheading, and you can go on. So this is just text, again. So this is how we do images. They will get resolved once we build actual documentation. But this is actually not Markdown. This is sort of something that I feel I definitely want to fix. But that's kind of a legacy thing now, where it's a template where we insert things after the fact. But unrelated to what we're actually going to do. So I'm actually going to change this to and editing graphs and panels. There we go. So I made a change. I can go down, if I scroll down, updated heading to sentence case. So I tell people what I did. I can provide more the description if I want to. But for now, I'm just going to commit the changes. And this is how it's going to look for you if you go there. So if I click commit changes, what's going to happen is that it will ask me to create what's called a pull request. And that's actually what the maintainer for the project will see. So it gives you some documentation here for what you should write in your pull request. But let's focus on this for now. What this PR does and why we need it to adhere to our beautiful style guide. You can go on here. I'm keeping it simple for now. But then you click the create pull request, and what's happening is that now the pull request is made. Now it's up to the maintainers to have a look at this, to review it, basically, and see if is this something that we want to accept? Is this something that we want to bring into our repository? And the cool thing is that I can actually do the review as an outside contributor as well. And that's the final stage here, review changes. So I actually asked my colleague, and he wanted to be very clear, because he actually fixes an issue here. It's related to, so he changed, so we can see what file he changed here. He changed like a paragraph into a more numbered, numbered list with verbs in the beginning. So where the first one you can't really see the steps. So now we've changed it again according to the style guide. And so what I'm doing right now is I'm looking through this file and I see, hey, wait a minute, there's a missing R here, right? And again, he wanted to be very clear that this was intentional to help me demo this. So what I can do then is I see the line, I can click the plus, and I can say missing R. And then when I click start review, then I get put in a review mode, basically. And up here it says finish your review, basically. And for now, I think that looks good. So I could also like add multiple comments here, but for now, I think I'm done. So here I can give in like a general like, yeah, this looks good. Think about this next time. But and then I can say, well, this looks good. Then I can click approve that yes, this is, go ahead and merge this. Or I can, in this case, I'm requesting changes because of the missing R. Then I submit my review. And this you can do no matter if you're like part of Grafana or not. Anyone can like submit their reviews. And actually, a big part of why reviewing, like getting things merged into an open source project, is that it takes time for maintainers to review these changes. If someone else went in there and reviewed them already, it makes life so much easier, and we can just merge them right away, basically. So
But
That's-
this process and everything
Yeah.
and is supported by GitHub.
Yes, everything here is GitHub.
Hmm.
Nothing custom at all. Everything is just, so, I mean, this applies to any open source project. This is not just Grafana. This is, since I have commit rights on Grafana, that's why I'm showing this. But yeah, this process is for any GitHub project out there. So that's 3 ways of contributing. That's really what I wanted to show, but just to show like for those who are like maybe still struggling about Docs code. So this is the actual repository. This is like, I mean, all these folders contain the actual code, but we do have a docs directory here, and then we have sources. And here you can see all the sections in the documentation on the documentation side. So the page that we changed, or that we wanted to change, was somewhere here, getting started maybe. So here. So it's just text. But when we merge this, it becomes a commit. And when that happens, we have something called, we've connected a service to our GitHub account. It's called Circle CI. And it's basically a build system that picks up this change and then like builds whatever it needs to build, basically.
Where do you define the structure of this site?
Yes. So that is, so we're using something called GoHugo. This is a tool that takes Markdown and produces HTML. And Hugo takes the Markdown and the theme, and then produces, so it combines the theme with the content, and then produces the final HTML. So we've basically written our own theme. That's what we did. Yeah.
That's about the layout, or the structure of the content.
Yes. I mean,
it's
a theme is like you can write your page any way you like. Basically, you basically have, it's called templates, so that you can say, well, like I can write my web page, and then here I want to insert whatever text that is in the Markdown, right? And then that will just get resolved during the build step that Hugo does. So you can decide the layout, the styling, everything.
I think the question is about the navigation structure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but is that a separate file?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So let me see. I can.
Like if you add a new Markdown file, for example, what happens? You need to define it somewhere else to make it
Yes.
show.
So here, for example, we see that every. Let's see if I can. Here, for example, you see if you check the raw thing here, it's kind of small, but here you see this is called front matter, and it's like metadata for Hugo to like determine where this should end up. And here's a section on for documentation. So it says that parent tutorials. So this document should go under tutorials.
Do you write that, or
I write that.
Okay.
Yes. So I only tell Hugo where to place it, like the hierarchy. But it's up to Hugo to actually like do the HTML and make the actual dropdown. The weight is where in the list. So if something has a lower weight, it will end up higher. So if I put 1 here, it will end up on top. So that's how I order.
So if you want to add a new file or a new page between, like, say, number 3 and number 4,
Yes.
then you would have to update all the.
Yes. Yes.
How do you keep track of that?
Well, yeah. I mean, another way of doing this is to go like in steps of 10, for example.
Right.
And so you take bigger steps right away. That's one way of solving it. But yes, in general, every section doesn't have that many articles, so it's not a big deal for us. But for others, yes, it might be.
while we're torturing with questions, can you talk a bit more about I assume your books are heavy with graphics and images and the like.
Yes.
How does your awesome process work with the non-text information?
So, thank you for mentioning the one thing that I'm not as proud of. So right now we're kind of rebuilding the doc sites, and we're kind of in a migration process. That means that the images are actually private right now, which makes it more difficult. So if you want to contribute images, we kind of need to take them from you and put them in there. But so right now, like you said, I had a section in there that was a template that Hugo takes and then inserts the actual image. It's not Markdown, it's Hugo. And that when we actually run a build, we build something called Docker images, if you heard that before. It's basically just baking everything into like a bundle.
So images are in private repo on GitHub. You still store them in a GitHub just private.
Yes, we do. That's something that I'm pushing towards making public, and hopefully, I would like to keep the images just next to the actual document.
And version them.
Yes. So versioning is actually quite nice because we're using Git for versioning. So I don't know how much you know about Git, but you have the concept of branches. So so you have the what's called the master branch, which is kind of the history of your project. And at any point in time, you can branch off into another history, and that could live by its own. So every time we do a new version, we branch off, and that documentation could live in that branch on its own. And then we continue updating the master, but that version won't change. So what happens is that you end up with something that looks like here, for example. So you can check back in all our different versions of the documentation, and that's just Git branches. So that's kind of nice that we can bring that together.
And then when, one last bit. So as a new user, whenever I want to check out the source for Grafana, I have to check out the whole thing with all the histories, all the images, and suddenly my hard drive.
No, well, yeah. I mean, I see what you mean, but it's Git is very good at dealing with all these files, so it's not really an issue. Yes, all these changes are in there, but the compression in Git is really good, so you won't see it. I mean, you can always say that in Git you can go to the branch for version 5.3, and then I could update that and just push to that branch, but it's not an issue actually.
You mentioned earlier in the talk that if there's a code commit that might have a documentation issue, then you remind. How do you do that automatically, and how do you do that? So how do you know if a code commit has a related documentation?
It's up to maintainers to see that, well, this is changing how the UI looks.
Okay.
This is probably impacting on the documentation, but we don't have automatic checks, if that's what you're referring to. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know how we would do that.
That's why I asked.
Yeah. Maybe next time. Yeah.
That's why we have this community now, so we can find out the
Yeah,
solutions.
exactly.
Do you have another open source project where you want to get this towards? Like, is there something like you're like, wow, they're doing it really well?
Good question.
In terms of how they do like Markdown, or just like an open source project that does documentation well?
I guess the documentation and the contributing part, because that's the thing I think you're focusing a lot on. It's like making it super easy.
I think there's a project called Kubernetes that is really good at, the reason why I think they've gotten so successful is because of how they deal with community and how they accept changes and how they work. They basically got these working groups that accept like changes within a certain section of the project, and it's really well made. It's a huge project though, but I think they've gotten there because of the way they deal with these things. I've never contributed documentation there, but I know it's good. Another one that I kind of like is the chef documentation. I think they, yeah, oh, okay. Thank you, Google. This is kind of like where I hope to bring Grafana, where you have all these modules and learning tracks, basically. So right now, Grafana is kind of fragmented in that like, it's difficult to find the things that you want right now. If you're a beginner, you can't really just press next and be better or get better and understand more. You kind of need to like go back and forth. Whereas I think Chef has done it really well. Whereas like, okay, I want to like get going, so I press quick starts, and I can check, basically go through this like kind of interactively. Where okay, I wanna learn more about, I say this. It says it's kind of a collab, but it's kind of documentation, and I mean this is a different kind of documentation than reference manuals, for example. But this is something that I would like for us, for example, because we have different personas that are using. We have both developers and operators. Operators are the ones that actually usually look at these graphs, but it's more like noticing if something like breaks, like if you have downtime. But developers, they instead go to Grafana to problem solve. We know there's a problem, but where is it? So they're more like a different mindset when they come in. So I kind of want our documentation to reflect that, where you can like, okay, I'm an operator, go down this path. I'm a developer, go down this path. And you get like a curated documentation for your use case. That's kind of the vision I have, but, and I think Chef does that well. Chef, I believe they have this.
They also use intercom.
I'm sorry?
They also use intercom.
I don't know what that is.
In the bottom right corner.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we use that for pushing. So they ask questions and then we push them to the knowledge center.
Oh,
yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think Kubernetes.
The one what we saw from Chef, isn't it just for users? It's not for developers, I think.
Yeah. Chef is more for. Well, actually, Chef is more for like I would say operators, and more like it's called DevOps kind of area. But yeah, I mean that's my point. Like we have different intentions when we go to the documentation. I kind of want the documentation to reflect that. So here's another. Okay, that was kind of anticlimactic. Sorry. I don't actually know where they keep their translations. Okay, yeah. Sorry, I don't have a good answer for like for that part.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
Do you have a good idea, or have you seen good examples of like identifying coverage of documentation? Is that something that? Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
So the kind of the background of this is that, like I said, this Grafana is kind of the documentation for Grafana is built by developers over a long time, and we haven't really like had the mindset of that like a technical writer would have, and I think something like that is definitely missing because we're like a lot of developers they write code because they have to, not because they actually care, and you see that sometimes. And I would look for that's what it, like kind of why I'm hoping to build out like technical writing in Grafana to be able to do all these cool things because at this point Grafana has a ton of features. It's already successful in that manner, but in order to take it to the next step, it's documentation for sure. That's where we need to shine if we want to go further. And currently there's a lot to do there.
Do you have a web system for?
For documentation coverage, I wouldn't say we have anything right now, but it's an area that we're thinking a lot about.
Yeah.
So that's why I asked the question.
Yeah. No.
I think it's hard because I don't actually think having 100% documentation coverage is a good thing either.
Yeah.
You want like a small amount that you know is like good, rock solid, less likely
Yeah.
to be outdated.
Well, the more coverage you have, the more documentation is going to potentially be outdated.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
But on the other hand, there's some systems. It depends on the system as well. If it's like dealing with money, then you probably want like everything super well documented or something.
Yeah.
But if it's something else.
But a general question, do we actually expect the developers to write the code, or are we also expecting them to write good documentation together? This is something which I don't have an answer.
I hope that we will get there. I think it's a part of being a more senior developer to be able to write documentation for what you do. I think it's a core thing, like a core part of developing software is to document it. Yeah, I don't know.
I can see that you have different motivations because at Spotify the developers otherwise get a lot of questions.
Yeah.
So documenting is a way of
Makes sense to
keeping.
them.
I definitely say why not get questions.
Exactly. I mean, if we don't have like for example Spotify, you're writing documentation for, like internally, people that are already committed to what you're building in some sense. But we have people that are maybe just come in afternoon and see, oh, this looks cool. Oh, no, it's too difficult, and then they just leave, and we would never know. So we want to make sure that we have the good documentation to be able to catch those people, because they're not obliged, they're not forced to use this at all. So we kind of want the documentation to be so easy that we catch them.
Yeah. I do think there's some overlap. Maybe it's just a Spotify thing, but at Spotify, like you aren't mandated to do these things, right? Yeah. So, but maybe other companies, it's like you have to do it, right?
Yeah.
So we do have to do that as well.
Yeah.
Developers will not just do it. That's why we have a team for it. So.
If I may contribute a totally different take on the solution to your question of like how to squeeze the docs out of developers, especially when there's like a huge system and just like one super busy core developer, like the most senior probably dude in the room wrote it, and like he's super busy writing the next thing. Like, how does this thing work? Yeah, I'll finish this and write it. So what I did, I would basically, well, the short answer is video. I would put that person next to me, the camera, like 30 minutes. The dude is mine for 30 minutes with his laptop on his, because it normally works on his machine. So like I'm recording his screen for 30 minutes, and bingo, there's like a video, a person who wrote the thing. I asked him the questions because I mean, most of developers are sort of introvertish and it's hard to get things out of them. So I asked him the questions on the camera. I edit the video. So out of like 30-40 minutes with the senior person, we have 15 to 20 minute video up to the point, and in a very friendly format and with all the links everywhere. So it sort of works.
It's like hearing about that. I get like speaking about the Kubernetes project. It's infamous for being very difficult to set up and configure. And a part of so there's another developer advocate called Kelsey Hightower, and he's doing it within Google. He works for Google, and within Google he does what he calls empathy sessions, where he takes the developers that wrote the code, sit them down, and try to actually configure what they wrote.
That's awesome.
And a lot of them are like, I can't remember how I did this. I need to check the code. Like, and that is like, let's fix this. Because like show them that this is not usable. Like you know the internals, you know like why things work, but not even you can figure out this. So it makes you humble.
It's amazing.
So I think that's
yeah. That's also a big part.
Yeah. Cool. So if I'm gonna throw this one out, but if there is anyone that wants to make a contribution, I'll be here to merge it. So if you have your laptop with you and a GitHub account, I will give you an issue that's real simple, and then we'll merge it for you. maybe we'll have some beers or
Yes, we have.
and do that. So
If you stay, you get a beer. If commit, you get two.
yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, according to the agenda, we have enlightening talks. Does anyone want to say something quick?
My one-liner would have been that like 3 of us have just met on Tuesday for the first time ever, and like there were actually 9 of us, and we called it like first ever developer relations meetup. So like
Really?
yeah.
Oh.
So and there was one person who was a technical writer, and she was basically the star of the evening because like developer advocates or like with a programming background, and the person who knows how to write docs. So and that's she was a star basically. So what I'm trying to say that in about 6 weeks we're gonna do a second iteration of the developer relations meetup. Probably it's gonna be in a very similar format like here. Probably more with a unconference focus. So yeah, you're welcome to join.
Are you on the Write the Docs Slack?
Yes.
You posted it
Yes.
in the channel?
In which channel?
Sweden?
Yeah, good. Yeah.
No, Portugal.
Unfortunately.
Let's go there.
Yeah, maybe
That's
they
great.
some in 6 weeks it can be needed.
I just have one sort of regarding your question. Like, do we expect developers to write good docs? I mean, communication is very general. Like, we want everyone to be able to communicate well, right? So I think I have a mission. Actually, it's like to help everyone to be able to communicate without any barriers. So of course, I would like them to be able to communicate well, but then we are there to help them to, to smoothen the whole way forward.
Mm.
So I think it's not only for developers, it's only for anyone who needs to contribute to content, like maybe system managers or project managers, whoever needs to participate and contribute to the content. So they need to know, like most of organizations need to have the style guide and everything. I think we as tech writers, we are. So I don't know, you are developer, it's different. I mean, I think like we are technical communication advocates. So we want to advocate good style and good communication. So we can actually collaborate and do workshops, etc. to help each other. And then we could understand we have like developer relationship. Like then we understand each other as well in that case.
I'm also trying to understand our developers. Mostly they say that it's against their motivation to write documentation.
Mm-hmm.
So the documentation should generally go to the architect or it should go to the product owner to write some patches and push the code.
Yeah.
And it was really hard to convince the people with strong opinion that they're only meant to write the code. Yeah. It's a challenging task.
It's kind of like what I've also been struggling is like should developers be testing? Like should they test their code? I think yes,
Yes,
because
they
they know
test
it.
it,
But
yeah.
there's a lot of developers out there that feel like no, that's for QA. Like I'm not gonna test. That's why we have QA for, right? But I feel like, and I think a lot of processes in software developer companies, software development companies are I mean, if you know like a Kanban or like a Trello board, where you have columns, for example, and you like define tasks. A lot of companies they define like okay, build a feature, then have a different task for write tests for this feature, and then document this feature. And what often happens, in my experience, is that once they are done with the build a feature, then management tells them that no, we need to ship it, focus on building new stuff. And then it gets down prioritized. It's like no tests, no documentation. And instead like see like, okay, building this thing includes testing and documenting it. So I'm not done until all of this is done. So if management comes to me and say, how are we doing? Instead of saying like, oh, okay, I'm done building it, now I just need to document it, I'm saying I'm still working on it because it's not done yet. So
maybe that is exactly the place where we need some sort of strong motivation like documentation coverage, which says that if it is even automated, then it completely says that you can't commit a new feature until you write the documentation for the LEO. Maybe that is some point where we need to move ahead.
You might pose a risk that people write bad docs, so developers will like they
they just put an extra new line.
They write it bad enough. I don't need to do it.
Or they'll just copy just.
Yeah, but that's a start. Like no docs versus bad docs.
So strict.
It's complex question, but like sometimes like I worked at Uni Technologies, and after a while, so that's a super complex product, and I've been there like from when it was a small startup. So like, upon maturing, the first thing was like you cannot ship the feature until the tests are there, and then you cannot ship the feature until the docs are there. And it's like this right now. And before it was like this. Basically, it ended up with the company unable to ship anything because it would break randomly, and nobody would know what to look. Because I mean, like done, but it breaks. Like what? Well, it breaks randomly, just randomly.
Shaba, do it.
Sorry, need to run. Nice meeting you all.
Yeah. See ya. Yeah. 8 o'clock.
One thing I've been thinking about is like a good way to kind of measure documentation, or possibly is like when people teams build software, maybe 2 or 3 years down the line, they start talking about like the new system or something that replaces the old system. How many of those could be avoided by just having good documentation? Because oftentimes teams build new systems to replace the old one because they don't understand how the old one works. And building new software is very expensive for companies to do. So if that could be avoided altogether, that's like a really easy way to improve impact, like long-term impact. And developers do not like being told that like, hey, this is great, but in 2 years' time we're going to kill this because you're doing
I'm actually one thing I've seen work at a couple of places is what's called README-driven development. I don't know if you've heard about that.
Say again?
README-driven development. So before you write any code, you document it. Because if you can't explain it, then like don't write the code. Like you don't know the problem well enough if you can't document it. So it's like starting with a very basic documentation, but still something, and then you implement what you documented. So instead of just building something and then just trying to cover what you built, you start with like a design and documentation.
Bye
everybody.
Thank you.
See you again. Bye.
You really have the case that if there's a discrepancy between the product and the manual, and the product as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, but yeah, exactly.
But that's a bit like how Scrum should be ideally. You should have a good use case, a good story description that explains. That is almost a README.
I mean, in some cases you don't know these things up front, but yes, I mean, then we just go amend the documentation and then like, I mean, some things we cannot know up front, but I think that we at least should try to do some design.
But I see a lot of cases where developers can't really write the documentation because they don't know what they have implemented. They've done what the project manager told them to do, and they don't really understand it in the larger context.
And this is kind of what like we're talking a lot about in software development, where like in engineering teams that we want to own the code. We want to own the product as developers, where we not just get told what to do, but we own it. And if that will also mean that we feel proud when it works well, but we're ashamed when it works less than well, right? Because it's sometimes you divide software into multiple teams, so it's easier to blame someone else, right? But if you own, like, he left, but like the own the problem and the solution,
there you are.
Right? That's no, you're right. So I mean, that's what we're getting at. Like if you have that, it's easier to be proud and work for quality since you have ownership of what you're building.
And if you have driven development and some kind of good test process, you can have into test case that you should like test the code and check that it's consistent with the beginning.
That's okay. There's also like things like Swagger. I don't know if you yeah. So where you build, but it's more like a schema, like how it works. I actually would be very interested in if you could codify documentation so that you can check it to the code, like more like body text, rather than like.
That's a next step for
Yes.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just a question, just living in my brain for many days. Are you guys actually seeing this schemas, especially JSON schemas, kind of thing as APIs, or is it just a format which needs to be again massaged in any other text or any other document kind of file? Like I'm just worried about JSON schemas right now.
Okay. I mean, I've been using JSON schema at a few places, and where we take the JSON schema and then we generate the documentation.
Grafana, it's like the panels are based on some JSON, right?
Yes. Yes.
It's also an API for an application actually. When they say that, okay, this is the panel that I need to load into Grafana, maybe I need to store it somewhere.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, yes, we do have API documentation, if that's what you're referring to.
I was only thinking about JSON context.
Okay.
So I have a JSON.
Yeah.
It's my API actually.
Yeah.
But I'm still confused. Do I need to place it as a document or it's just a JSON schema?
But can it be part of just like the API documentation?
Generally, if we take this REST interfaces, generally we have JSON schemas or XML format which are embedded, which will help us to actually to explain any sort of CRUD operation.
Yeah, but it can be the assets for the API documentation. They can be part of it.
So your question is whether it's fine to just have the JSON schema, or if you want to have.
Is it fine to have it just a JSON schema or not?
It would suck to just have to look at JSON schemas. They're not fun to look at. It's code, but I wouldn't want to browse that. Sorry, I would much rather have it generated to something more beautiful. Yeah, but maybe that's just me.
Some people need to go. So, but we have one thing more. Yeah. So, should we continue?
Yeah.
Yes. Then let's do it. Anybody who wants to join in fixing these meetups, just ping me on Slack or say yes now, and then we get together. And
if you have any suggestions.
yes, so where to? Yeah. And if you have any sponsors, so we can get food next time. Yes. Yes. And I don't think we had any more. We have some beer if you want to stay and do some commits, or just do some chat. And if you want to, I have some swag. So this is a book about AI, and if you want some stickers, I have some here as well. So thank you for coming. It's been great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And my email.
I saw you
Yeah, okay, awesome. I'm not even
Swag.
That is Thomas.
No.
So you sound like you actually need something.
I do. It's just I'm worried after seeing how much I don't have experience.
Tjena!
This is Natasha. She's
I
friend.
Yeah, I am.
She rented my
I
apartment.
did. I was in his apartment.
Yeah.
And basically, you have
individual.
All right.
Yeah, so we built this feature in
All those memes
so where you can have multiple folders. And then when you build it, it brings them all together and publishes it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But it's an
I wanted to say thanks for organizing. It was great. I didn't even have to talk. That's great. Wanted to, so I will. Well, it was kind of covered already.
But now you're, what are you doing now?
I'm gonna check the meet. I probably won't put together problems for have a meetup at my company. In terms of all the organizations we're done.
What sort of company?
I can inquire around the venues because I know developers and the only separator I was talking about is for the second product. We're both by the American company they have a large team. They don't work the way I do.
Now, but sure.
CMS, I was don't see code. Okay. So, yeah. I think they're gonna their way, but I've been resisting for 9 months now.
All right.
And I recently bringing them on
Which is
our ways. I covered why, well,
It's just like
I
the same problem.
for me, it's not a problem definitely because I write in XML, so I use Oxygen and the data format. So images are not.
Yeah. Hi, by the way. Nice to meet you.
The documentation is
Gary. Oh, okay. Like a signer, LIS, or whatever it was.
we built it.
Far end of Roosevelt Island.
I was thinking
It's not too bad. It's an hour.
So you can
Total.
4x in front of you.
20 minutes walk.
The developer documentation, we have Swagger documentation for most APIs, and that's actually maintained by developers. But on top of that, I do the API documentation as well.
Yeah, we should do lunch. I'm looking forward so much.
With examples and stuff, because in Swagger you get the class and you get like tried out, so you know you get some stuff. But then I actually go into the details and give examples of something, cover all the fields and
kind of, it really works.
you can't put all that. And it's
Still employed but not working. I'm looking for something new.
Swagger, or do you have to be
So I worked at the activity
I write everything
for financial industry.
We use
The same kind of company as we
I was thinking, is the update someone you don't have any
just started looking this
no,
week.
but there is no, you don't really have to
because it's right in a different way.
you don't really have, I don't have to reuse Swagger because I'm doing something different, because Swagger is kind of general, here's a path and picture stuff in it and try it out, and these are the responses you might get, and these are all the fields you use. Then what I do is, write more information for every field.
I don't know if I can be cool and wait for the right one to show up or
or
Yeah,
if
they're
I
mentioning
should
about Loki
jump at the
where
first
you can see
opportunity.
metrics,
How do you?
So, well, traces.
Well,
right?
some were
Yeah,
just
we want to go
consultants, so
to.
it's different
So,
for everyone. So yeah,
and
and
that's been very
that
much.
makes
That was good
this
to go on, you
focus
go.
different
Yeah.
to
Now we want to go to more to
like
the observability path.
because
I
I have
so
all
would-
the
it would
different
be
cases.
fun to do
So I
something
have this
There's a
customer
slightly,
having
what happened. You can like zoom in and then you can
slightly
pause,
different.
like, just within
Might
the
be
Still
input
more
box, and
easy
that's what
exciting,
Loki
to
does.
learn.
But maybe
So if you
input
have
towards
specific
filters
some
on
hardware or
customer
machinery or
this is the
machines
customer
or
with
this
like
environment.
because
that
otherwise there's so many unknowns when you start thinking about it.
So that's
I mean,
what I
this
think about it. So
worked
with
out
Loki,
for
that it's
us
using the same.
accidentally. I mean,
I'm
curious
it
about one
used to
thing
be
that
Prometheus.
to colleague
So
mentioned
it's
that
not with the
if your
company,
vision
it's
was
just
to
where
go
you
from
can
like
like
trouble or being stuck to
and
having
her
a
wish was
solution
always
in
to
1
work
minute.
So it's
this
like
way,
Yeah,
but
were you able
since
to
we had
measure
another
that?
team
How
with
do you
another
feel like
company,
That's not good.
tracing is like
I
The shears
Very
when you walk down
it
the
was
hallway.
easier
Give them away.
there was still a lot of manual stuff to actually publish.
we're kind of looking at it, but
And then when another company bought us, we used the migration period basically to save our documentation because we were kind of abruptly cut. And it was like, okay, we have to do this, so we got developers to help us. And the only way they know how to do that is their way, right?
Yes.
And we were like, yes.
And so the other team, the American team, they were using some kind of CMS.
So they were using Data as well and working in XML, but we had no scripts that you had to run, and then you would have to
I think some of it could
manually
be
do
like
some stuff in like Ametria and Drupal to get
it's not very clear. It's not just
content
that
out.
people might look at
Every
something,
time,
might
and that
be
was
very
super
frustrated.
annoying, and then you know,
Yeah, exactly.
you have to announce that
You have to
it's
use
good
our
for
base
something
environment.
and
Two-sided
and here it's like whatever. Maybe there's some conflict, but
Do you have
usually
to
resolve that
ask for kind of
out.
perceived quality or just a rating?
so yeah, what I think makes Grafana great is that you can pick your
No, we don't. Not that aware.
So Loki is just the first one, but we're looking to like support Splunk, for example. So if you are using Workstash or like Alexa for logging, you can hook that in and then use that. So if you want to, you can use Elasticsearch for both metrics and logging, but it's up to
We
you.
want to have
But
some
Loki
kind
doesn't
of
be banned, all the
quality
three should be
indicator,
available
like
in the same
maybe
storage.
No. You can run Loki by itself, and then you just point Grafana to where Loki is, and
contains
then you can run
everything
Prometheus here, or you can run Grafana.
today.
So
I
Grafana
don't
is
think
like the
quality is the right word though. I think trust.
Yeah, that's what
Because quality kind of indicates like this is like perfectly written, but it doesn't answer my questions, right? And it might be me. I might not be smart, but the quality's high. But actually, we don't care about we care about does it solve your problem?
Did it help you
Yeah,
or
exactly.
not?
So I think quality is not the right word. I think trust it. Like, do you trust it? Would you come back?
And I think trust is super important, and in many cases it takes a long time to change. If documentation or information has been poor, people stop caring about it, and then there's an effort to turn that around.
There is beer in the kitchen.
There's a lot of nagging about beer.
Which is kind of not a competitor, but like it's doing sort of what Grafana does. But you're using you have a plugin for data log, so you can pull in the metrics in Grafana, and then you can get like a dashboard that shows all these systems because.
The Datadog itself also has nice dashboards and even some intelligent dashboards in it. But do we still need Grafana on top of Datadog?
I mean, if you have only Datadog in your entire company, like maybe that works for you then. Then I wouldn't say if you go all in on Datadog, then you don't need Grafana.
Okay, you mean to say that when we have different sources like Signal FX or Datadog and something, blah, blah,
Yeah.
and again Grafana will act as an enabler.
Yeah, then you can collect everything into one single dashboard. So that's the. But if you're all into Datadog, you should go with that.
That's really nice. This idea I didn't get it before.
Yeah, but let's say that you want to have a dashboard over departments, and one department is using Datadog and one is using something else. And then it could be nice to have like one dashboard across everything that just sucks in all the